How's it going? Kevin Clear here with a knife video for you, and I want to show you a knife today that is kind of different and interesting. This is the Browning Black Label Pandemonium, and there's a couple reasons I wanted to get my hands on this knife. One, I've had certainly a perception of Browning knives that, you know, they're kind of not the greatest. Generally, Browning just sticking their name on a piece of junk because they know it'll sell because it says Browning on it. They've certainly been making some changes, and they've come up with this black label. I'll see if I can get it on camera there. Browning Black Label division that's supposed to make higher end knives, and some of them are actually pretty expensive. This one, I couldn't decide if I was going to say quite or pretty, so you got quitty. Anyway, this one is not as expensive, but it's kind of a cool looking blade, and for that reason I wanted to try it out, especially because I imagine there'll be other people who've seen this knife and thought, yeah, that is kind of a cool knife. I wonder if it's any good. And so I got it, and I've been trying it out for a while now, and the simple answer to that question is yes and no. There are some good things about it, there are some things I wasn't that impressed with, and I'll share those with you as we go through here. So let's, as I often do, just to keep myself organized, start with the blade and kind of work our way down. The blade is 440C stainless steel. It's 3.5 inches long, and as you can see, there's kind of some interesting things going on here. I would call this a modified Tanto. It does have the secondary tip here. It is different because it's kind of got these curved edges rather than the nice straight edges that Tantos often have. Now, when you look at it initially, it can feel like this is kind of a recurve here, but it's not so much of a recurve as it is, you know, it runs straight and then dips down to form this secondary tip. So this part of the blade is actually quite straight, and then it just curves. So, you know, I'm still going to call it a recurve, but it's just a little bit of a different recurve than what you're used to seeing. I know it's kind of covering half my face there. I'll try to reposition myself. And then, of course, in the next portion of the edge leading up to the primary tip, there's another curve. It kind of curves out this way. And the blade shape then is kind of interesting. There's a swedge on the top. There's just a lot of different things going on here with the blade, and there is a thumb ramp. The thumb ramp is actually very functional. Now, I've cut a whole bunch of stuff with this blade and found it performed quite well, and in fact, it's still really sharp. That tells me that the 440C they're using must be pretty well heat treated. That seems to be the determining factor. 440C can either be pretty good or pretty bad depending on the heat treatment, and I've used this a lot and thought it should be dull by now, but it's actually still really sharp. Now, part of that is probably blade geometry. It's a very narrow grind as it comes down here, and it is a hollow grind, and so it comes down to a very narrow bit of steel as it comes to the point, which means it's already narrow, and then you sharpen it, and so it's going to give it a fairly good blade geometry. Now, the blade, I can't say anything bad about it. I've used it for lots of different things, and in fact, I cut up some fruit the other day and used it this way, where this secondary edge is quite long, and so it actually works really well if you're working above a table to kind of cut down this way and kind of chop a bunch of fruit or vegetables. It worked out really, really well. The secondary tip does work just as on most Tanto blades. Really nice for utility tasks. You know, you can cut it into boxes. It kind of extends your reach, and yet still allows you to have this tip to cut with, as if you were cutting with this tip. Instead of having to tip the knife up straight, you can do the same job just with this portion of the blade and do it quite effectively. So it's nice having that extra utility ability. And by the way, the thumb ramp on this is also very, very nice. I don't think there's too much else to say about the blade. Interesting blade shape for sure. Seems to hold an edge reasonably well. I mean, it's 440C. Don't expect it to last forever. It's not VG10 or S30V or something like that. But it seems to be okay. There's no blade play of any kind, so we're kind of moving toward the handle now. There's no blade play. The pivot screw is a Torx screw, and it does function pretty well. And since you're looking at this now, I'm going to let you know about the pocket clip. This, when I first got the knife, the pocket clip was in this position already. but it was kind of, maybe not as tight as I'd like it to be, and there's a little bit of movement in there still. And what happens is this screw is not all the way sunk in, and I can't get it to sink in all the way. I moved it to here, and it doesn't seem to be so much that the holes are bad or the tapping is no good. It seems to be the screws themselves are really soft metal, and so I'm actually going to try to replace them. I've called Browning, and they may be either replacing them or sending me a whole new knife. I don't know. It seems crazy to send a whole new knife because of screws being kind of messed up, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, I'm going to be in a larger city in a couple days, and I'm going to see if I can replace these screws. And if that makes a difference, that'll be good. And I'll do a little follow-up video or make a comment to this video about that. I'm not impressed with the pocket clip, though, because of those screws. I feel like it's not an overly expensive knife, but still, if you're going to put your name on something, and if you're going to say we're stepping up our knife production here, then do it. Take it seriously and do a good job. I'm not impressed with these screws. I'm not impressed with the fact that I go to move the pocket clip, the screws are stripped. It doesn't stay. And this one, the top one here, won't stay in at all. You could just tip the knife, give it a bang, and then that screw would fall right out. So not impressed with that much at all. Otherwise, though, the handle is pretty good. It's a sort of a smooth. Now I've seen it called G10, and I'm going to say it's G10. It has that feel to it, certainly. It's a very nice feeling handle material, but it's smooth. Now, normally we talk about the grippiness of G10 and how great that is. This is a smooth material, and that under normal circumstances, I'd say, man, there could be issues with holding on to the knife. But although this looks a little odd, the look of it with all the finger choils in it looks a little odd, the ergonomics are amazing. This handle is actually very, very functional. I cannot believe how comfortable it just locks your hand in totally. And my hand is reasonably large, especially the dimension of my fingers. So even though they're not long, they're kind of fat. And this knife fits my hand really well. I don't think anyone, there's still a lot of room. You could have huge fingers and those choils would still work. And especially with this kind of hook on the end, it's amazing how that knife locks into your hand. Extremely good, extremely comfortable. And so I've got to give it top marks for the handle. The smoothness makes it so there's no hot spots, but those choils and the shape of the sort of hook on the end actually make this handle extremely functional. So the handle is really, really good. It is a liner lock, and now I'm kind of back to the yes and no stuff. So the blade shape, the blade function was good. The handle shape, the handle function, good to even excellent. The thumb ramp, good, excellent. Now I'm going to get to some of the negative things. The liner lock, if you can see where the liner starts to bend over, it's right here. It's higher than most. So the bend in this liner is more severe. Normally your liner lock is a little more gentle, and it gives you a straighter, longer run up to the bottom of the blade. That's better. One, because when you put pressure on that lock, so think about this. If I've got a lock that's just a little bit off and I push hard on it, the transfer of force is much straighter and therefore stronger. Now, if I bend that lock even more, now what happens to the transfer of force, right? Now it's going to want to bend at that point rather than transfer the force through the liner into the handle of the knife. So that's one of the downsides. I'm not crazy about the way they did this liner lock. The bend in the liner starts too close to the tang of the blade. It should start bending out down here somewhere. That would make it both easier to manipulate. So because of that severe bend, the lockup, it's harder to get that knife to unlock. You've got to push harder because the bend in the metal is steeper. So you're pushing, you're fighting the metal more than you would be if it was a gentler angle coming into the knife. Secondly, it's not very comfortable. I have lots of liner locks. I have no problem with liner locks. I'm not going to complain that they're not strong enough or anything like that. But this liner lock, they could have smoothed those edges just a little bit, especially considering how hard you have to push on it to disengage it, and it would have been a little nicer. Deployment on this blade is so-so. I say that without having taken it apart and cleaned everything up. And I know I said that in a previous video, that it's good to do that with your knives. I haven't taken this apart and cleaned it and oiled it. And so the deployment is okay. Like, I'm not going to complain. The thumb studs are, again, okay. They're probably a little sharper than I would like. They could be a little more comfortable, but they're not. It's not the end of the world. It's fine. So, as I said, there's pluses and minuses. Pocket clip. Now, the pocket clip, in terms of the ride and retention, is fine. It's not that it doesn't work. It's not that I'm complaining about the functionality of it. In fact, I like the functionality of it. I just don't like the fact that the screws are falling out. I don't like the fact that I can't move it easily because of quality control. You need to, if you're going to make a knife, make sure that the metal in those screws is hard enough that it's not going to strip easily. Make sure that the tapping in those holes is done with precision and with quality so that I'm not stripping, damaging the screws as I'm trying to put them in. That just seems like common sense, but this knife failed a little bit in that regard. Now, you could take the pocket clip off totally and carry it in your pocket. It's probably a little big for that, though. So the pocket clip is kind of a necessity, and I will follow up this video and kind of mention whether or not the whole thing was resolved successfully and I'm happy with the pocket clip now, or if I feel like this is maybe a knife that you should avoid because of that. If you really like the shape of this knife, and I will say, there's a lot to like, okay? The handle is super ergonomic. The blade is kind of different and interesting, but extremely functional, which I like, okay? I like knives that look a little bit different, that have a little bit of style to them. Overall, I actually like this blade, and I wish the pocket clip was better so that I could feel better about carrying it all the time. I do carry it, and I do cut with it, and it hasn't, failed me in any of those capacities, but I just wish it was a little bit better. I think this is about a $25 knife, maybe $30. Add $5 to the price if you have to get the quality control right. There's no excuse for it to be anything but pretty much perfection, especially when you're trying to rebrand yourself as a higher end knife maker. So that's my take on the Browning Black Label Pandemonium. Pretty cool knife. I mean, the look and feel is neat. It's interesting. It's different, especially in the tan color with the tannish colored blade. I really like it, and I really want this knife to be a knife that I can, carry a lot and use a lot. It's a little smaller, so it's nice for those days when I don't want one of my bigger knives like my Recon 1 or M21. But there's just a couple little issues that make me go, I don't know. And I will do a follow-up to let you know how that stuff works out. Talk to you later.